in the Department of Special Education here at Cal State Fullerton. Although my main area is special education, I created this particular webinar and topic to cover all education. So just, simply making virtual instruction meaningful so that it doesn't feel like busy work to your students. So thanks for joining me. I know some of you may be teaching online summer school or getting ready to do that, and some of you are planning for whatever fall will bring for us. And really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule. I'm so happy you're here. Obviously, since you're attending or you're viewing this, you want to learn ways to make your virtual instruction meaningful. So I really applaud your efforts to learn more about that. So let's see here. Okay, here we go. So here's what I'm going to cover today for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the basics, what kind of going back to basics, what makes and learning meaningful, and how can we apply that to virtual instruction? How can we connect authentically with students, because that really ties in to making their learning meaningful to them. I'm going to talk about keeping it deep and simple. What I mean by that, I'll go over that. I'm going to show you a resource on applying the 5E instructional model, which is a really great model, applying that to virtual instruction. And then some different ideas on how you can really inspire purpose in virtual instruction, and how students can demonstrate learning in a meaningful way. And then I'll also talk about some different games that you can play with your students, because it's so important that we are incorporating. That's really how kids of all ages out of what they're learning. And then time for questions at the end. All right, so first a few definitions just to get us started here. So meaningful learning, what I mean when I'm talking about meaningful learning is learned knowledge that is fully understood, and the learner can relate that new knowledge to other stored knowledge. So there's a lot of definitions out there about, what does meaningful learning mean? This is the one that I'm going off of today. Not just learning something that's interesting, but being able to make those neuron connections in the brain between what's been learned new and what's been previously learned. That's really how we make meaning, is through those connections. And meaningful instruction is instruction that provides multiple ways for students to learn, engage with, and practice the content. Now, we know that learning takes on personal meaning to students when it is paired with a sense of purpose. And by purpose, I'm going to use this definition by William Damon from Stanford University. He's a researcher there, and is that it is a stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is at once meaningful to the self and of positive consequence to the world beyond the self. We find purpose based on what matters personally. All right, so I'll get into more of that as we move on. So, so what? So why is all of that important? Well, we know from research that when learners feel a sense of purpose, they are more likely to engage with the content. And that's what we want, right? We want that academic engagement. We know they are going to keep coming back for more sustained engagement with the content. We know they are more likely to store their new knowledge into their long-term memory, LTM. We know they're more likely to make connections within and between content, leading to exponential learning. Or in other words, the more we learn, right? We learn more and it's meaningful, and then we learn more. It's just this exponential experience. That's what we want. And they're more likely to trust their teacher. What I'm talking about there is that they are going to trust that their teacher has important things to learn from them, which means they're going to keep coming back for more. So I want you to take a moment to reflect on your prior knowledge and experiences here with this topic, and recall a learning experience that felt meaningful to you. And think about what made it feel meaningful. And then I also want you to think about, what do you already know about making instruction meaningful, and how do you normally do it? So if you're watching this and it's already recorded, you can go ahead and pause and just take a moment, because this will really help kind of make this purposeful, sort of a priming activity. And for those of you who are with me live right now, I'll go ahead and talk about a moment that I recall. And if you want to jot down your own ideas kind of while I'm talking, you can do that. So I remember when history finally became meaningful to me, and it as a graduate student. Before this, I did not enjoy history. It was my least favorite subject. And then in graduate school, I learned about the history of education, and special education, which is really, really interesting, and not really a very flattering history, I'll put it that way. And it was so, so interesting. And what made it meaningful was, number one, I was studying to become a special educator. So I already had the purpose there. But number two, it was super interesting. And it was no longer about learning dates and names and memorizing, the names of wars, or just things that didn't really mean anything to me before whenever I would learn history. So much memorization, it just felt so boring. But once I got to graduate school, history became about the stories. And that's what really opened my eyes up to just how interesting history can be. And now I'm a bit of a nerd, and I love to just read about history of all kinds of different things for pleasure, for my own interest. So that's kind of my own, one thing into my mind when I think about that. So let me tell you some things that we know about the brain. We know that the brain is purpose-driven. It's going to remember things when we feel an important purpose behind it. And purpose is very personal. And it's also incredibly economical. It remembers things that the brain decides is important. First, it's going to remember things important for our survival. That's number one. That's what it's going to remember. Second, it's going to remember things that it believes will lead to a good, fulfilling life for us. So that's kind of up to each individual's brain. Of course, it's more complex than that. I'm simplifying it, but you can think of it in that way. And so what gives us a good, fulfilling life? For adults, often, if we're lucky, and I think teachers in this way, it's our work brings us a lot of fulfillment and meaning and purpose. But for children, it's in the play. Play is the work of children, right? And so the brain is going to be attracted to things that are fun and that are playful, that are meaningful. And this goes from preschool through teenagers. Teenagers still need that sort of playfulness in their instruction as well, because they're not adults yet. So when you hear a child ask, "Oh, why do I have to learn this?" It's really their brains asking, sort of, hey, I have a lot of stuff already stored in here, and a lot more is going to be coming. So, is this important enough to take up space? Does this spark joy? So think of it in terms of the brain, not just a kid being like, trying to get out of something. It's really the brain kind of, is this important enough to take up space? So we need to go back to basics. Teachers do know teachers learn how to make instruction meaningful. But after the sudden school closures, teachers were faced with creating virtual learning activities as quickly as possible. And they had to all of a sudden figure out how to teach online, often managing their own kids at home, and all in the midst of worldwide fear, uncertainty, and change to our daily lives and routines. Now, nonetheless, teachers did an amazing job rising to this challenge. Amazing. And now that some time has passed, we can do what all good teachers do, which is reflect on what worked and what didn't, and then move forward for planning with what's next. So, some of the basic principles of teaching and learning were lost in some cases amidst the rush and chaos, but now we have time to reflect and go back to that. And the first basic that I'm going to remind you of is the reflective teaching cycle. That's the first thing that we can do with this whole situation. And the reflective teaching cycle is plan, teach, assess, reflect. You didn't have any time to plan, not nearly enough time. When you first didn't really have an opportunity to do that, like meaningful assessments really. Now going forward, we can plan. First, reflect on how it went if you already did some of that online teaching, and then plan going forward. What can we do differently? What can we do better? And continue that cycle, that reflective teaching cycle. Keep planning, teaching, assessing. Even if you can't do the best assessments on your students right now, do what you can in order to inform you of what's working and what's not, and then reflect on that and make those changes accordingly. So that's what we're doing right now. Okay, so we know that research shows from at all levels, from preschool through college, that students who feel connected to their teacher are more likely to feel a meaningful connection to the content. So when we're looking at making our instruction more meaningful, that's really step one. We've got to connect with the students. And it's tricky to do that when we're not in the classroom, in person, face to face. But there are still a lot of creative ways that you can make that happen. So one thing to remember is that students really want to feel seen by their teachers for parts of themselves that they feel are important. Stories over stats. What I mean by that is you read the statistics or the stats on your students before you get them, right? You look at their prior grades and their test scores and what other teachers might have written down about them, discipline records, and that's all good stuff to know and be aware of. But to really get to know your students is to listen to their stories and share your own stories. Let your students see you. This is how authentic connections happen. And authentic connections is the gateway to meaningful learning and the gateway to your students making authentic connections with the content. So do not skip this step. Does it take time? Absolutely. Is it a one and done kind of a step? No. You must invest in truly getting to know your students by listening to their stories, asking the right questions, and sharing your own. And you must do it repeatedly if your goal is to teach effectively. So I encourage you to open up and share your stories as well, even if they seem off topic or unrelated. Students love learning about their teacher's personal life. You know, you talking about your family or your pets or anything that's important or interesting to you, that's going to let them in, and then it's going to make them a little more open to letting you in as well. One thing I always encourage my credential students to do is to keep a journal of personal stories. So they don't need to have any with anything. They can just be stories that you think kids might enjoy hearing from you. You know, what was your school experience like? Who were some teachers that you loved and who were some teachers that you did not like, and why? Were you bullied in school? Were you ever kind of a bully in one situation or another? Open up and be vulnerable. Think of your embarrassing moments, your funny stories, something funny that your pet or your family member did last night, anything. And then you will find places that those stories totally fit in with what you're teaching. And then others that you might just share simply for the purpose of connecting with your students. So that's really a fun activity to do, and it can really help you to connect with your students. So here are a few ways that you can connect with your students in a virtual setting. Okay, so number one, and I really encourage you to do this, is to take an interest inventory. Most teachers do this, and you might not even call it an interest inventory, but where you can, the getting to know you surveys that a lot of teachers send home at the beginning of the year or have students complete in class. So you can do that, and but more gear it more towards what are their interests, what do they enjoy learning about, what are their hobbies, what are they involved in, what are they passionate about, is there anything they would like to learn during this time with you. And then you can kind of figure out, okay, oh gosh, everybody's really into Minecraft right now, or everybody's really into this, or several students are into this and several are into that. And then you can start to plan some activities where you're tying in their interests. And that's automatically going to make it meaningful to many of the students. Maybe, you know, I recognize not every single lesson is super, meaningful to every single student, but these are just some ways that you can get a lot of students on board. Also, you can look at what's trending. Like, what's today's fidget spinner? I'm sure we all remember the fidget spinner craze, right? Or Pokemon cards. So, right now, I just know from online that a lot of things that are like trend have been food and baking. We know that. Banana bread and that whipped coffee. Also, people are really into board games. Those have been selling out. So a lot of families are playing board games and doing puzzles, taking walks out in nature. People are developing new hobbies. Kids, I think the number one I read this last year. Uh-oh, my internet connection's unstable. I hope you guys can hear me all right. But the number one kind of YouTube video that is watched is YouTube tutorials. So those are very popular. TikTok, things like that. So pay attention to what's trending and then see how you can weave those kinds of things into your teaching. Food and games, incorporate food and games as much as possible. I know, at least for my daughter, anytime there was a game in her Zoom meeting with her class, she loved that. And anytime there was an assignment that involved food, that was super fun. So those are always wins for your student. Obviously, you're not going to do that for every single activity or assignment, but if you're incorporating that as much as it makes sense and is feasible, that's a great way to really keep kids excited and engaged. Also, it's important to hold space for feelings, especially right now, but anytime. Kids always have big feelings about things, no matter what's happening in the world, right? So we can connect with students and build trust with them when we hold space for their feelings. You can share your feelings about whatever it is, ask students to share theirs. And I've seen this done by having students send their teachers a video talking about, responding to some sort of a prompt, maybe talking about how things are going, sending or write it in an email or share in a small group Zoom or a whole class Zoom. You have lots of options. Of course, you don't want to force kids to share their feelings, but give them multiple opportunities to do so, and then respond with empathy. And then also it's really important to hold space for just regular conversation, venting, and laughter. Again, to connect with students and create a safe place that they want to return to. Of course, also we want to remember their needs. And these are things that you as an expert on children or adolescents are going to know. What is attention span? What is their kind of level of need for play and socializing? And what is their capacity for independent learning? So those are all things to keep in mind, and things that you've probably already been keeping in mind. And then reconnect with yourself as a teacher. Like I was mentioning before, that this was all such a rush. And we kind of lost some of the basics in just trying to put distance learning packets out there as quickly as possible. And we lost track of some of the basic elements that make for effective teaching and learning. And I think teachers also lost a little bit of touch with who they are as a teacher. Why did you go into teaching? Take some time to really think about that. What are you passionate about? What are your favorite things to teach? And then teach those things as much as you can, so that you're really getting back in touch with your purpose. Because when you feel a sense of purpose, that's really going to snowball and kind of trickle down into what your students are feeling. So I love this quote, and it's from Mr. Rogers, and it goes like this, and then I'll talk about it. Deep and simple is far more essential than shallow and complex. And the quote actually continues with, in the end, life isn't about material things. It's about the relationships you have with one another and yourself. And I think this is just so, so relevant to teaching. Sometimes we get too complex. We get too much going on. And I saw this a little bit with some of the distance learning. Teachers really wanted to give kids a lot of choices and a lot of options. And that's great. Choice is good. But there can be too much sometimes to where it gets overwhelming. And then we're not really going in deep to any one concept. We're kind of all over the place. I saw this, I see this from time to time in my own teaching. In one of the classes I've been teaching for years and years, I had started kind of finding new ideas and wanting to refresh the course and put in new stuff. And then it got to be so much that I think my students were feeling like they had some busy work. It kind of, even though it wasn't busy work, it was all really important. There was so much of it, it started to feel that way. So I had to really reflect on that and pare down and not try to cram so many great ideas into, one semester, one class. And I had to really pare down and think about what is essential and what can I go into that in more depth so that it's more meaningful rather than all over the place. So let's see, let me just look at my notes here. Okay, so I want to encourage you to really put your efforts, instead of spreading them out among finding a lot of different activities for students to try to keep them busy and keep them engaged, instead kind of, gather that focus and effort and focus it into less. Put more of your effort and brain work into less instruction and assignments. And your students will in turn have a deeper and more meaningful experience with less content. So I came up with this little acronym, KIDS, and I was thinking about it as KISS, if you've heard of that, Keep It Simple, Sweetheart. And KIDS stands for Keep It Deep and Simple. So think about, I kind of started on this a moment ago. Think about what are your favorite things to teach. And then you can, and also think about the interest inventory and think about what's trending and pull some kind of central topics from those. And you can kind of do like thematic teaching, but keep that central for at least 1 week, but really you could go longer than that. And that will be a decision that you make based on kind of your students and their age and all of that. But things that you find exciting, and you can connect essential level skills to your topic if it works, but don't force it and don't overcomplicate it. Incorporate opportunities, if you can, for students to connect socially over the content, and go deep into it. And, you know, if it doesn't really work to connect it to, you know, the standard, then provide some other opportunities for just brief practice and application and maintenance of those essential skills. But I wouldn't overly focus on that, because that's when I think students are getting disengaged. So if you can find things that are exciting and that you're excited about and that students are going to get on board with, that's going to help them stay engaged with you. And that's what we need. If we're overly focused on the standards and kind of stuff that kids feel is boring, they're going to check out, and then you've lost them. If we can keep them engaged and keep some brief opportunities to practice those skills, we're going to have a much better outcome. And, you know, my guess is that nobody's like micromanaging you right now. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what I'm gathering, is that you have a little bit more autonomy right now in all the craziness. So take advantage of that. And yeah, keep teaching, you know, what you're supposed to teach, but also teach what you don't normally have that autonomy and freedom to teach, like, because you don't have time. So if art is what you love to teach, but you never get to spend that much time on it, or science, or whatever it may be, now might be a great opportunity to do that and then re-engage yourself in the excitement of teaching and really get your students engaged and coming back for more. Deep and simple. So here is an example of kids in action, keeping it deep and simple in action. I wanted to share this resource with you from the Getty Museum. So the link is there, but it will probably be easier than you writing it down to just search Getty Museum lessons. And there are a whole bunch of them, all free. They don't take a lot of materials. A lot of them, it would just be the materials perhaps that students could find at home. There's all of this downloadable art for free, and you can share it with your students, and lessons already done for you. So this one is about, it was called Fantastical Beasts. And it's actually more of a unit because there's several lessons in there. And it's about the artwork of beasts from medieval times. So super cool if you've got some Harry Potter fans in your class, to kind of tie that in. And basically, you know, you start out with kind of a discussion where you would perhaps, if you were doing this virtually, you might show this image in a class and start off a discussion about it with your students. And then from there, there are several activities to follow up with. And then you can also think of ways, the lessons on the Getty already tie it into language arts standards, which is great, but I think you could also think of other ways to tie it in, perhaps with math and with writing and things like that. So you are still covering that content and those standards, but just really focusing it around something that will get the kids coming back. Okay, now I just want to share another resource with you about the Ease instructional model. And I'm not going to take the time to go over it, but but I just wanted to show you this resource, direct you to this resource. So the 5 E's instructional model is a really great back to basics instructional model that aligns very well with the deep and simple approach. And the 5 E's stands for engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And author and educator Catlin Tucker demonstrates how to apply this model to virtual teaching. So again, the link is there, but you can just search Catlin Tucker 5 E's, and it should pop up. And she writes it out, and you can read about it. And she also has a very short, like less than 2-minute video per E, where she talks about it and shows you examples of how you can do it. And in this next slide, this is up on her website. I know it's hard to see here, but download this for yourself on her website. So as you can see, it's each of the elements, and then what it look like, and then what virtual tools you can use to support each element. So that's a really great resource that I recommend. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just kind of ways to inspire purpose your virtual instruction. So a few concrete ways to do that. One, just back to the basic step that we forget as teachers is to actually state the purpose. I always forgot that. I mean, I didn't always, but I was like notorious for just forgetting that simple first step is to state the purpose. So don't forget to do that, because that actually does help students feel more of a sense of purpose if you just state it. And then research also has shown us, research on the brain has shown us that we remember things best when there is an emotional connection. Those are some of our strongest memories. So if you want to really make sure that that your students are going to remember something, see if you can create an emotional connection for them. Are going to do that if you're able to use their own interests, or use perhaps if you're excited about what you're teaching, or you're about it in some way or another, then that's going to help a lot. But then you can also pose a question. So, you can pose a question like, have you ever felt like things were unfair? And that might lead into a lesson on, fractions and equal parts. So when you can think about just a simple way to phrase kind of your opening, so that students it doesn't have to be super emotional, but students are kind of having that emotional connection, that's really going to help. And then also be a model. Talk to students about what gives you purpose, personally and professionally, and in relation to the topic that you're teaching. Model the language of purpose. Learn first through modeling, right? So we can't really expect students to develop a sense of purpose and be able to talk about it if we're not first modeling that to them. You can also help students to discover purpose by getting them to talk about their interests, listen to them, and have them write about things that are important to them. Spend some time helping them identify their strengths and values. If you're able to make time for like small group Zoom meetings, that's a great time to do that. And also, we know that gratitude helps people find their purpose. So a gratitude mindset is a really great thing to help foster in your students. And one idea to do that would be to assign homework that is just your students need to ask their family members one thing that they're grateful for, maybe one time or maybe every day for a week, and then record their answers. And then you can do so much with that. That can turn into data that you can analyze as a class. Are there any trends among what, siblings are grateful for, teenagers are grateful for, moms and dads, outside family members? So, you could do some really interesting things with that as data, or it could be a starter for a writing activity. Another assignment to help inspire purpose would be learning. It's called learning about ourselves from others. So this would be the assignment that you would give to your students, and you would it would be to reach out to 3 people on email or phone calls, whatever works, who know you well, and ask the following: what do you think I'm good at? What are my greatest strengths? What do you think I really enjoy doing? When do you think I'm most engaged? How do you think I'll leave my mark on the world? And then you can follow this up with discussion or a reflective writing activity, or assign students to discuss this with a family member or a peer. So that's a fun way to help students learn more about themselves and start to really think about purpose. More activities. This would be kind of for junior high or high school. And the prompt would be, imagine you're 40 years old. What will you be doing? Who will be in your life? What will be important to you, and why? And you want to have a discussion about this, have a conversation with students that the why is often where purpose lives. And that's something fun. Kids love to think about that. So that's definitely something that will most likely get them engaged, get them kind of excited to think about what they'll be doing when they're 40 years old. And then the last ideas here are have to do with kind of checking in with students. You know, incorporate frequent self-tests by, you know, kind of teaching students how to explain concepts aloud to themselves, or they can do it to their pets, and then take it a step further and ask them to explain a new concept with a previous concept learned. So that really ties in that meaningful instruction definition, right? You can also provide brief but frequent surveys to give some self-assessment of learning, help students check in with where they're at on a certain skill. Frequent low-stake testing. That is not for grading, but to identify students who may need additional support. So if there are any students who are struggling, that's when sometimes they're going to start to check out. You can kind of swoop in there and give them the additional support that they might need. And then you can also have students do peer checks. And I like this idea. It fits really well with virtual instruction, where you might collect work from students, but take their name off of it, and then re-disseminate it to other students so that they can identify and correct mistakes from their peers. It's a great activity for their own learning. And then also here are some meaningful end products, some meaningful ways that students can demonstrate their learning. Creating, and I got a lot of these ideas by the Cult of Pedagogy. I love that website, Jennifer Gonzalez. I hope you can hear me. I keep getting a little note that my internet is unstable. So I hope you can hear me. So creating any kind of book, a children's book, a handbook, a picture book. You can do this on paper or through an app, and creating an infographic like we see online all the time. Creating a video tutorial or a written tutorial covering just a chunk of what you've taught. Creating an artifact or a multimedia collection. You can check out the Smithsonian Learning Lab or Google Arts and Culture website for some ideas. Student app like Anchor, which is a free podcasting app to record a podcast where they express an opinion or tell a story or teach about something that they are passionate about. And also you can have students create videos demonstrating their learning in the form of a commercial or a public service announcement or a news segment or a TED Talk. Of course, they can create a website. I love this idea too. Creating fake Facebook profiles of favorite book characters. Actually use Facebook. You can use some other platform to create profiles of favorite book characters, and you can actually have different students do different characters and then have them interact with each other on each other's walls or something like that. Also, you can set up sort of a Twitter-like platform where students summarize something, maybe a part of a book or a science concept, tweet form, which means 280 characters or less. Not as easy as it looks, so that's going to really challenge them. And then I also love this idea, hashtag research. So you have students pick any topic that they're interested in and then search hashtags for that topic. Great for social justice issues, but it could be for anything. And so the first step is to find out everything they can learn just through hashtag searches. Then, and this is so Common Core, right? Checking evidence about that. Use multiple trusted sources to fact check their findings and then create a report. And the last thing I'm going to go over is play. So like I said, you know, play is the work of children. We've got to incorporate play every chance we get. So here are some games that I've seen or that I've read about that look really fun. 3 items. My daughter did this last week. And during a class meeting, you ask students to collect 3 items nearby in their home without telling them why. Then you can give them a prompt, a scenario, such as, if it's just for fun, it might be, if you were stranded on an island, which of these 3 items would you want to have with you most and why? But you could also tie it into your central topic. And you might say, if you were doing the Getty lesson that I showed you earlier, you're in a fictional story set in medieval times and you see your friend about to get attacked by a dragon. How would you use one of your items to intervene? So you can really get creative with that. A few more ideas, pet commercials. Students can create a short video to promote their pet, either a real pet or a stuffed animal or a toy. And you could even incorporate vocabulary this way. You know, use 5 of your vocabulary words in your commercial. And then Mad Libs. This is something that you can do in a face-to-face class, but you can very easily do it online. There's a lot of Mad Libs online. You can use an actual Mad Libs, or you can create your own and tie it into your content. And if you're doing this at a class Zoom meeting, then you might have students write down their answers on their own and then pick a student for like different, you know, part of speech and then read the Mad Libs story. And then, you know, just snack and chat. Some teachers are holding once weekly optional snack and chat meetings just to allow for free socializing with you and with each other, because I know they're really missing out on that right now. And then Spirit Day. If you're having weekly meetings, maybe you do this once a month, maybe you do it every week, where you have a different theme, like hat day, mismatched clothes, crazy hair day, pajama day, school spirit, etc. And then a few other ideas, you know, freeze dance. You can do that just like you would in class. Directed drawings. You can search for directed drawings on YouTube and then share your screen and do it along with kids, or do your own. Art for Kids Hub is a great resource. And then you can create a TikTok style assignment. This would be for older students. You can use Flipgrid or another more private platform. You know, TikTok has like with privacy and reposting without consent and things like that. So you might want to use a different platform, but you can kind of use what's trending on TikTok. I am going to sum up here because 45 minutes went by really fast. But I encourage you to really look at the virtual field trips that are out there, because that would be a super fun thing to do once a week with your class. You can go to Mars, the San Diego Zoo, Yellowstone. There's a bunch of farm tours, lots of animal cameras at the Georgia Aquarium. So that's something that you can do. And there's a ton of scavenger hunts. If you just search for Zoom scavenger hunts, that's one that my daughter really enjoyed. Yeah, so, you know, in summary, connect, open up, listen to your students, share about yourself, teach to their interests and yours, get back to the basics of teaching, those essential teaching and learning principles, keep it deep and simple, and meet them at their level of attention, understanding, and playfulness. Here are some of the sources that I used for this webinar. And now I am going to take some questions.